Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Chris Pasternak. He's the Managing Director and North America Oracle Lead at Accenture, and David Knox, the Group Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Public Sector at Oracle. Gentlemen, it's good to have you both. And David, we'll start with you for the first question here. And now that federal agencies are 10, 11, 12 years into this whole business of cloud migration, what should they pause and take stock of? What do you think the status of cloud migration is, and what do you think the future trends are as we look to the next 4 years, say?
Well, interesting question, Tom, because the thing about cloud as we're in definitely much more mature than we were 10 years ago. An interesting fallacy, I think, is people said, well, cloud is the thing. And when it started, that is what it is, but it's continued to mature. And so what that means is that there are a lot more options, a lot more services, a lot more capability today than we saw only a few years ago. And so what people need to do is they need to revisit that and think about how can they take advantage of those. Is their first initial go at the cloud, in fact, achieving what it is that they want? And then how do they incorporate those new capabilities into what they're doing?
And let me just have a follow up here. The phrase second generation cloud has emerged. I know that Oracle uses that to refer to the updated cloud services that offerers have. Is there in fact a second generation of cloud, and what are what generally characterizes it?
Well, it's hard to say that there was an official ball drop on the second generation. I think when we look back historically, we will certainly see that there was an era two, version two of cloud that we are now in. And that has to do a lot with both the cloud service providers, again, and how they're able to build these hyperscale clouds and really continue to drive economies of scale, as well as how our customers take advantage of those services. And again, to the point that I just made, it is about understanding the new way. I guess the second part to this second generation might be thinking it's not an all or nothing kind of scenario. It's not, I need to shut down everything and move everything. It is, what is this coexistence? What is this world really going to look like? And the world is really going to look like multiple cloud providers, some on premise, some in clouds, and abilities to move and migrate. And the agility of being able to consider those new architectures, those new capabilities, those new providers will be the key to success.
And Chris, I think early on, the ease of migration to cloud might have been a little bit overstated. Agencies thought they could give a GSA credit card and then move their enterprise applications right upstairs and they were all done. So, in the reality of cloud migrations, what have you seen as the major, say, challenges, or what are some of the stumbling blocks agencies may still be encountering?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Tom. Yeah, the I would say there's three major things that I continue to see, and this is true not just of federal government agencies. It is true everywhere. So, we're in good company here when we talk about these things. The number one item here is, how do you define success? If you don't have some sort of definition of what success is going to look like when you get to cloud, how do you know you've achieved what you wanted to achieve? I mean, how do you know where the goalposts are? So, a lot of organizations look at it and say, we need to reduce costs. Well, cost is a good driver. It's a good consideration. But think about, there's other things in costs. Frankly, there's non-tangibles. There's, more subjective things like job satisfaction for IT staff. There is, how do your end users feel? Have you improved their experience? That doesn't have a hard number necessarily, and then that can be a measure for success. I think the second piece of the puzzle there is, you nailed it, Tom, in terms of originally people thought, oh, I'm just going to magically, things are just going to move and they're magically just going to work. And we now know that's just not true. When you start thinking about your cloud journey, you start thinking about moving things. Key factor here is realizing if you have architectural limitations and problems on-prem and you just pick that up and move it to cloud, you are probably going to have those same problems in cloud. You've just moved it to somebody else's servers. So taking time to do some amount of refactoring is where you're going to really get success. How do you take advantage of what cloud has to offer with things like the ability to turn things on and off and be able to use all those wonderful things that we've been, advertising about cloud for 15 years. Um, I think the final piece of the puzzle there, the third thing that I see a lot that we have a lot of conversations about, is, when we get to cloud, we've marked success. We know that we did it. We did our refactoring. We're there. Is after I'm already there, now what? So staying on top of the continued innovations of cloud, but then also staying on top of your steady state. And what I mean by that is, number one complaint I get from clients when we start talking about where they are in cloud is, well, it was supposed to be cheaper and it was for a while, and then cost overruns. Forgetting about things like, it's hard to forget now. We all talk about data egress, right? So we all think about that, but there are other things that, if your business case was built on 60% uptime, that I'm going to shut things down on my dev environments down on the weekends, and then you don't actually execute on that, you probably got a cost overrun coming. So you got to move your mentality away from legacy IT into this new operating model, this new thinking, and really develop things like your governance strategy. How are you going to provide autonomy to your organization, to your developers, your system administrators, that sort of thing, with some amount of control? If you give total autonomy, you're going to totally blow up your budget. But if you just lock everything down and clamp down, you're back to legacy IT, and it's going to take you forever to get things spun up. So you got to find that balance. And so the key to ongoing success beyond just the migration is governance and strategy.
And David, we mentioned cost. That's an easy metric to know whether you hit or came below or came in above. But there must be other metrics that are getting at that intangible, say, speed of deployment. In fact, even maybe the service you are able to offer citizens and constituents. Those are measurable metrics that could be associated with cloud. What are some of the ways people can measure success other than the cost factors, which are not trivial, but they're not the only ones?
Correct, Tom. And I think it comes down to overall service levels. The availability of the cloud is, we just expect it's going to be there, and it can be designed such that it is there a lot. Taking advantage of that, by the way, is a responsibility of the reader, right? This is an exercise left to the reader. You can do it incorrectly. Just as Chris mentions, just because you got it into the cloud doesn't mean it magically resolved any misconfigurations, misappropriated architectures. Performance increases. Sometimes we're hearing a lot about tremendous performance increases. And at first, some people say, well, it's, I don't know, 1 second or a second 0.3. I don't care. It seems to be okay. But really what that means is that they can get more people, they can absorb more surges and demand on the system more transparently than they ever could before. In fact, as the pandemic started and there were certain parts of the public sector that were hit harder for checking for things like eligibility, and even as we roll out COVID, systems that were designed with a certain level of throughput in mind were 10x, maybe even 100x what that is, and they just fell over. They just couldn't take the load. So with cloud, what we see is if that happened and you were on a smaller server at first, well, shoot, you can make that server much, much bigger or even add more to it. And this is a non-problem for you now. So knowing that in advance allows a lot more agility. And the last thing about this that I think is very important is that critical word security. And we think about cybersecurity in general and what happens if our information is exposed. And a lot of it happens to be exposed, if not held for ransom. And the cloud service providers, they have to put together a very robust infrastructure. They've hired the world's best computer security technologists, network security people, and that is inherent. In fact, you can't even get around it. You have to take advantage of the security that's there. Doesn't mean you can't set up a configuration that sort of leaves the doors unlocked and wide open. Again, that's a bit on you. But the security is there. And I think if you take all of these things and add them up, it's not just the cost, it's the service levels in general, it's higher performance, it's the agility and scalability, it's the more robust security environment. All of these things really truly bring the value of cloud.
And Chris, how would you say the skill sets of the public sector IT employees have caught up to what is required in the cloud age? And I would include in those skill sets, that idea of skill sets, the ability to understand what is the best role played by the government versus the best role played by the cloud vendor, because
Mhm.
that balance might be different in the cloud era than with other types of vendors.
Yeah, and I think, from a skills and resourcing standpoint, let's face it, everybody's doing something with cloud, and everybody knows that it's nearly impossible to find cloud people, and they are expensive. And so, um, it's a tough balance. It really is a tough balance in terms of finding people, being able to afford them, and then that right mix of skills. And so, I think we're at a great point where we can start to grow people. And so, what I mean by that is public sector for the last decade or more has really been facing major staffing problems. IT especially, where not enough funding, not enough people, the whole mix. Can't find the right level of skills. Cloud gives an interesting opportunity, I think, for organizations to be able to grab onto something really interesting and then get and skill up people because they're going to want to do it. I mean, let's think about it. Someone coming right out of college, they're going to want to do cool new things. Cloud, is everybody talks about cloud. It's cool. It's new. I mean, Tom, how many people have you heard come out of college and go, dang, COBOL on mainframe sounds awesome? It just, that doesn't happen. So, take advantage of this opportunity. And frankly, in a lot of cases, you're gonna bring in SIs. You're gonna bring in consultants to help you get things into cloud, get things stood up, get things running, maybe even run things. Use them and set the expectation that they're helping educate your people. There's no reason that you can't have, what we call a two in a box model, where I'll bring some really smart architecture folks, and then you bring a smart architecture person, and we put them together, and you're bringing the heritage and the knowledge of your organization, and I'm bringing the new skills, and we're all going to be able to get the job done together. It's got to be a partnership. Then when the SI leaves, you now have skills in your organization.
All right, good advice. On that note, we will take a short break. My guests today are Chris Pasternak. He's the Managing Director and North America Oracle Lead at Accenture. And David Knox is the Group Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Public Sector at Oracle. I'm Tom Temin. This is a special Bulletin review, an enterprise cloud conversation, sponsored by Oracle and Accenture here on Federal News Network.